The sun was gentle that morning, warm enough to feel alive but not too hot to press you down. White chairs were arranged in neat rows beneath a string of fluttering blue and white banners that read, St. Elijah's Orphanage, 50 years of love. A choir of children stood in pressed shirts and floral dresses, nervously rehearsing their songs as the first guests arrived, coffee in hand and small talk in the air. On the surface, it was just another heartwarming local event in small-town Pennsylvania. But what happened in the next 20 minutes would shatter the illusion that had cloaked St. Elijah's for decades, and it would all begin with a single bark. You know those moments where something feels off, where the colors are too bright, the smiles too forced. That was the morning Officer Rachel Langley felt it. She wasn't a local. She and her K-9 partner, Shadow, were there as a courtesy from the county sheriff's office, offering a quick demo for the kids, something light. But the moment they stepped through the gates, Shadow's ears perked up in a way Rachel hadn't seen since the last trauma call they responded to. The ceremony kicked off as expected. Music, laughter, applause. The mayor gave a dry speech about tradition and generosity. Parents clapped politely. Reporters scribbled notes for a fluffy Sunday feature, and then the orphanage director stepped onto the small wooden stage. Harold Whitmore had run St. Elijah's for over 20 years. Tall, thin, and always in a navy suit, he had the voice of a preacher and the handshake of a politician. He smiled, big, too big. And when he took the mic, the crowd leaned in with affection. But Shadow did something that changed everything. He barked, not once, not twice, but in a furious, guttural rhythm that sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. The hairs on his back stood up. His body was tense, nose pointed directly at the stage, at Whitmore. Every instinct in the dog screamed danger. Rachel tugged the leash. Shadow down. That's enough, she whispered, embarrassed, smiling, awkwardly at nearby parents. But Shadow wouldn't stop. He growled, then lunged slightly forward, the leash tightening in Rachel's hand. Whitmore's voice faltered for a second, visibly shaken. He tried to laugh it off. Looks like someone doesn't like my cologne, he joked. A few people chuckled, but it didn't feel right. Then a strange thing happened. One of the younger girls in the front row, maybe 8, 9 years old, started crying. Not a small whimper, but a deep, trembling sob. She looked at Shadow, then up at Whitmore, then back at Shadow again. And she wasn't the only one. Several children turned their heads away from the stage. One boy subtly slid behind another kid like he didn't want to be seen. Rachel felt her chest tighten. She'd been on the force long enough to know when something didn't add up. Shadow wasn't reacting to a noise. He wasn't agitated by excitement or movement. He was locked in on one thing. Harold Whitmore. Rachel finally stepped back, pulling Shadow farther from the crowd, whispering reassurances into his ear, even as her mind screamed with questions. She tried to focus on the remainder of the event, the singing, the speeches, the oversized cake, but it was no use. Shadow's reaction echoed in her head, and the look in those kids' eyes haunted her. Later, as guests mingled and the crowd thinned, Rachel sat beneath a tree near the courtyard, letting Shadow drink water from a bowl. She stared toward the old brick orphanage building, its peeling paint masked by balloons and decorations. She couldn't shake it. Something was buried under the surface. A voice interrupted her thoughts. That was strange back there, said a woman in a modest cardigan and name tag that read Elaine, case manager. Rachel nodded. Shadow's never done that before. He's trained to detect fear, trauma, sometimes even residual stress. But that was something else. Elaine looked down. He's a smart dog. Then she hesitated. Some of the kids, they're scared of Director Whitmore. It's not something we're allowed to say out loud, but they flinch when he enters the room. Some even wet the bed the night before his inspections. Rachel froze. Has anyone ever reported? Elaine cut her off with a whisper. Don't. You don't know how this place works. He has friends, powerful ones. The last social worker who asked too many questions was gone within a week. Just be careful. Rachel glanced at Shadow, who sat perfectly still, eyes fixed again on the building. It was like he was waiting for something. Hey, if you care about stories where animals uncover the truth and save lives, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Heroes for Animals. We bring you real, emotional, and unforgettable stories that deserve to be told. That evening, Rachel returned to her department office and reviewed Shadow's behavior logs. He'd never shown aggression toward a civilian. His background included search and rescue after Hurricane Ian, and he once found a missing girl buried under rubble. But never before had he barked like that, like something inside him recognized a predator. Rachel was no rookie. She trusted her instincts and Shadow's. The next morning, she drove back to St. Elijah's without permission. Just a follow-up, she told herself. Shadow needed to stretch his legs anyway. But as she approached the side entrance, she caught sight of something that made her stop cold. A boy, maybe 12, stood in the garden. He saw her, then quickly turned away, but not before slipping something into his pocket. Rachel called out, "Hey there, I'm Rachel. This is Shadow. Want to pet him?" The boy hesitated, looked around, then slowly approached. Shadow wagged his tail gently, lowering his body in a calming posture. The boy's hand trembled as he reached out. "What's your name?" "Ben." "That's a good name." "Ben, do you like it here?" He said nothing, just stared at Shadow, eyes glistening. Then he leaned in and whispered something that chilled Rachel's blood. "He barks because he knows." Rachel knelt down. "What does he know, Ben?" Ben reached into his pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. Inside was a crayon drawing, childlike, rough but unmistakable, a tall man, a belt in one hand, a small child on the floor curled up crying, and beside them, a dog standing between them barking. Rachel looked up, but Ben was already walking away, vanishing behind the garden hedges. Shadow stood beside her, unmoving, eyes locked on the orphanage doors. And in that moment, Rachel Langley realized this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur of gnawing thoughts and second-guessing. Rachel Langley wasn't supposed to go back to St. Elijah's. Her visit with Shadow had been off the record. No paperwork, no clearance, just instinct. But the image of that crayon drawing haunted her, especially the way Ben had said it. He barks because he knows. Rachel had seen a lot in her 12 years as a K-9 handler, lost hikers, drug busts, domestic cases, but this was different. This wasn't about evidence yet. It was about shadows, whispers, children who wouldn't speak above a whisper, and a dog who barked not from command but from something deeper, something primal. Back at the sheriff's office, Rachel's partner, Officer DeMarco, noticed her silence. "You've been running Shadow more than usual," he said one morning as she returned from another unsanctioned visit. "Trying to clear his head," she lied, unclipping the leash. Shadow walked beside her but kept glancing toward the squad car, as if waiting for another trip to that orphanage. DeMarco raised an eyebrow. "You know we're not supposed to interfere with child services, right? You start poking around there, without a cause, and the brass will shut you down." Rachel didn't answer, because something didn't add up. The director, Harold Whitmore, had been praised for his strict but effective leadership. That phrase showed up in every article. She read. Local journalists loved him. School board reps called him a steady hand in turbulent times. And yet, kids were afraid to be near him. Shadow, trained to detect fear and trauma, reacted to him like he was a loaded weapon. She couldn't forget the girl who cried during the ceremony, or the boy who handed her that drawing. So she dug deeper. That afternoon, Rachel parked across the street from a small public library and pulled out her laptop. She wasn't on duty, but she'd called in a favor with a friend who had access to social services files. What she found made her stomach tighten. Over the past 15 years, St. Elijah's had quietly transferred out more than 20 children without formal paperwork being filed in time. Most went to other orphanages or emergency placements, but the reasons given were vague. Behavioral disruption, incompatibility with group home dynamics. Some were simply listed as early exits. One girl's name appeared 3 times, Lucille Jenkins, transferred at age 9. No forwarding. Placement. No adoption records. Rachel leaned back in her car seat. Something was being buried. Not just mistakes, patterns. She reached for her phone and called Elaine, the case manager who had pulled her aside at the ceremony. "Rachel?" Elaine answered cautiously. "I need to talk," Rachel said. "In person." Elaine hesitated. "Not at the orphanage. Meet me by the food truck on Elm. I get a break at 2. It was cloudy by the time they met. The food truck's fryer hissed behind them, masking their conversation as they sat at a picnic bench, 2 coffees between them. Elaine looked tired, more tired than the last time they spoke. "I went back," Rachel admitted. Elaine didn't look surprised. "And a boy gave me this." Rachel slid the folded drawing across the table. Elaine opened it, her lips pressed into a hard line. She nodded slowly. "That's Ben," she said. "He's only been here a year, but he's seen things. I tried to report it once. The board told me I was misinterpreting trauma responses, said Harold has a firm but necessary method, that he brings order." Rachel leaned in. "You believe the kids?" "I do. And I believe that dog of yours saw something the rest of us keep ignoring." Elaine wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "There's a closet in the East Wing," she whispered. "They used to call it the quiet room, said it was for kids who needed isolation. It's not supposed to be used anymore, but the door's always locked. I've heard cries behind it." Rachel's stomach turned. "Has anyone gone in?" "No. One dares, staff turn a blind eye. We're told to stick to our roles and follow the chain of command." That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. Shadow paced the apartment, ears twitching, restless. Finally, at 3 a.m., she stood by the back door and said, "Let's go, boy." The orphanage was silent when she arrived. She didn't go to the front gate this time. Instead, she parked behind the old maintenance shed and entered through a broken fence. Shadow stayed close, alert, ears up. Inside, the East Wing was cold. The hallway lights flickered, buzzing faintly. Rachel knew it was risky. She didn't have a warrant, but sometimes when the system won't move fast enough, you have to follow your gut. She found the door Elaine had described, plain, gray, with a tarnished brass knob. A child's sticker peeled off the frame. Shadow approached it slowly, nose low to the ground. He sniffed once, then again, then sat down. A low whine escaped his throat. Rachel tried the knob, locked. She pulled out a multi-tool from her belt, something she always carried, habit from the academy. After a few tense seconds, the lock gave with a click. She opened the door. The room was small, dark, the kind of space you'd expect to store mops or boxes. But this wasn't a storage closet. The floor was bare concrete. The walls were scratched deep by fingernails or something sharp. There was no light inside. Just a thin mattress, stained and torn, shoved against the back corner. Rachel's breath caught. Shadow let out a low growl. A broken shoelace lay in the corner. Beside it, a crumpled drawing, barely visible. She picked it up. It was another child's drawing. This one showed a box. A person inside, crying. Outside, another figure stood with something in their hand. A belt. A stick. It was hard to tell. Rachel stepped back and closed the door. She didn't need a warrant to feel the truth. The next morning, Rachel brought the evidence to her captain. He wasn't happy. "You broke protocol, Langley. You entered a private institution without cause. No warrant, no probable suspicion." "I had cause," Rachel said quietly. "That room was used recently. There are scratch marks. There's no justification for locking a child inside a space like that. I have witness testimony. I have visual evidence. And I have a dog trained to detect residual trauma, who reacted to the director more aggressively than I've ever seen. The captain rubbed his temples. You know how this works. That orphanage has donors, lawyers, a board. You want to go? After them, you better come with a hell of a case. Rachel looked him dead in the eyes. Then I'll build one. That evening, she drove to the edge of town. There was a diner there. Greasy burgers, weak coffee, and cheap blinds. A teenage girl sat at the far booth alone, hood up. Rachel slid into the booth across from her. Lucille Jenkins? Rachel asked softly. The girl didn't look up. I'm not a cop. Not right now. I just want to know what happened to you at St. Elijah's. There was a long pause. Then the girl spoke, barely audible. Does he still use the quiet room? Rachel's breath caught. Lucille looked up, eyes tired beyond her years. You want the truth? She said. You're gonna need more than a badge. Rachel reached down. Shadow sat at her feet, silent but watchful. I've got him too, she said. Lucille looked at the dog, and for the first time in what felt like years, she smiled. Lucille Jenkins stirred her coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the spoon as if afraid to make eye contact with what she was about to say. Rachel Langley didn't press. She knew better than to force a moment like this. Some wounds needed silence before they could speak. Across the diner booth, Shadow rested at Rachel's feet, calm but watchful. The dog had barely moved since they sat down, as if he too knew the air was heavy with something that couldn't be rushed. Lucille finally looked up. I was 9 when I got to St. Elijah's. My mom died of an overdose, and my dad was in prison. No one wanted me. Rachel stayed quiet, just listening. At first it seemed okay. Food, a bed, structure. But then, things started to change. If you broke the rules, talked back, had an accident in bed, even cried too loud, they'd take you to what they called the reflection room. Rachel flinched slightly. That's the closet, right? The one in the east wing? Lucille nodded. They'd tell you it was your fault, that good kids never went there, that it was the only way to make you better. And Director Whitmore? Lucille's eyes went hard. He never raised his voice. Never had to. He'd just look at you with that smile, like he already knew you were going to disappoint him. She looked away, her voice quieter now. I spent a full weekend in that room once. No lights, no food, just a bucket. I thought I was going to die in there after that. I stopped fighting back. That's when he said I was finally ready to be placed. Like I was cured or something. Rachel felt her throat tighten. And then what? They sent me to a different group home in Scranton. I didn't speak for a year. No one ever asked what happened at St. Elijah's. They just assumed I was a problem kid. You'd be surprised how quickly people stop asking questions when they think you're broken. Rachel reached across the table and gently slid a napkin closer. Would you be willing to make a statement? Officially? Lucille shook her head. You don't understand. People have tried. You think I'm the only one who wanted to tell someone? St. Elijah's is protected. The board has money, donors, politicians. They bury things. Kids disappear, and no one bats an eye. She glanced down at Shadow. But that dog? He's the first one who ever barked back. Later that night, Rachel sat on her apartment floor, her laptop open, files spread around her like a chaotic jigsaw puzzle. She'd begun cross-referencing. Names, kids transferred out of St. Elijah's over the past 20 years. The pattern was alarming. Every few years, a handful of children with behavioral issues would be quietly moved. No formal complaint. No record of mistreatment, just gone. She started making calls. Some numbers were disconnected, others went to voicemail. A few people hung up the moment she mentioned St. Elijah's, but around midnight her phone buzzed. A text, unknown number. I remember the quiet room too. I'll talk. Attached was a name, Caleb Rivers, and an address, only 30 minutes away. The next afternoon, Rachel drove to a mechanic's garage tucked off Route 81. Caleb was tall, late 20s, grease-stained jeans and a shaved head. He stood beside a lifted Chevy truck holding a wrench like it was an extension of his arm. "You the cop?" he asked when she approached. "I'm Rachel. This is Shadow." The dog wagged once, polite but focused. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. Didn't think anyone would care. Not after all these years. Rachel gave a half smile. "We care now." He exhaled deeply. "I was at St. Elijah's from age 6 to 11. That place taught me how to lie to survive, how to smile when you were scared, how to pretend nothing happened." "Did you know Lucille?" Caleb nodded. "She was quiet. Smart, though, saw everything. The director hated kids who saw too much." Rachel pulled out her notebook. "Can you describe what happened to you?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "They locked me in that room for wetting the bed. First time it was 2 hours. Next time, overnight. No blanket, no light, nothing." He looked away, eyes distant. "Once Whitmore caught me stealing food from the kitchen. I was hungry. They'd skipped dinner to punish the whole hall. He took me down there himself. Told me I needed to learn consequences." He paused. "He brought a belt," Rachel wrote quickly. "Did anyone else see? Anyone you remember?" "My friend Jesse. But he didn't make it. Transferred, they said. But I never saw him again." That name stuck with Rachel for the rest of the day. Jesse. She searched archives, called foster registries, even combed social media. No sign, no graduation photos, no job listings. It was like he vanished after age 10. By evening, Rachel was convinced Jesse wasn't transferred. He was silenced and she needed help. Rachel called her captain the next morning. She didn't ask for permission this time. "I've got 2 former residents willing to testify. I have photos of the quiet room, Shadow's behavioral data, transfer records that don't line up. We're past speculation now." He sighed. "Rachel, I can't stop you, but I also can't back you officially. You want to build a case, you're on your own." "Understood." She hung up and stared out the window. Shadow stood by the door, tail wagging softly. "Ready?" That afternoon, Rachel drove back to St. Elijah's, this time with purpose. She entered through the front gate, clipboard in hand. Her badge clipped visibly. She didn't wait for permission. She walked straight to Elaine's office. The case manager jumped slightly when she saw her. "I need 10 minutes, Rachel said. Elaine nodded and closed the door. "I need a list of any children who were transferred out under disciplinary causes in the past 10 years. Elaine hesitated. "That list isn't public. I'm not asking for the board. I'm asking for the kids." Elaine sighed, opened a drawer, and pulled out a faded binder. As Rachel flipped through it, her blood chilled. So many names. One stuck out. Jesse Dalton, age 10. Transferred due to aggressive behavior. No record of placement. No contact. Information. Rachel closed the binder. "I need to see the storage room." Elaine's eyes widened. "The one with the closet?" "Yes." They walked in silence. Down the east hallway. Past the old murals. Past the broken fire extinguisher box. Shadow's ears twitched before they even reached the door. He started to growl. Rachel knelt beside him. "What is it, boy?" He sniffed the floor. Then the door. Then the wall beside it. Suddenly, he began to bark. Not at the door. At the wall. Rachel stood, pressed her hand to the surface. Solid drywall. She turned to Elaine. "This wall, has it always been here?" Elaine looked confused. I think so." Rachel grabbed her flashlight and shined it across the corner edge, where the drywall didn't quite meet the frame. And there, in the slimmest sliver of space, was something she hadn't expected. Scratches, on the inside, tiny, frantic claw marks. Like someone had tried to break out. Rachel's voice shook. "This isn't a wall, this was built to seal something." Elaine looked pale. "Oh my God," Shadow continued to bark, and behind that wall Rachel could almost hear the truth, still echoing, still trapped, still waiting to be set free. The scratching marks on the wall weren't old. That was the first thing Rachel Langley realized as she ran her fingertips across them. The drywall was slightly warped where moisture had crept in, meaning the inside wasn't sealed airtight. And the scratches? Jagged, short, desperate. As if whoever had made them wasn't clawing at first, but trying to write. She knelt and shone, her flashlight closer. Her heart skipped a beat. Carved faintly between the scratches were 4 letters, J-E-S. A sit cut through her like ice. Jesse Dalton. The boy who transferred. The boy Caleb never saw again. Elaine stood a few feet back, covering her mouth, eyes wide. No one's supposed to be in there. That wall was part of a renovation 6 years ago. I just assumed. You assumed a lot, Rachel said quietly. She stood, trying to keep her voice steady. This isn't just negligence, Elaine. It's a crime scene. Shadow growled again, nose now pressed to the lower right corner of the wall, where the scent must have been strongest. He scratched at the baseboard, whining, desperate. Rachel knew what had to be done. I need to get this wall opened. Today. Elaine hesitated. If the board finds out, I don't care about the board. I care about the boy who might be behind that wall. Rachel called her most trusted contact, Tom Nguyen, a retired crime scene investigator turned freelance consultant. He owed her a few favors from an old child trafficking case they worked together years ago. Within the hour, Tom arrived at St. Elijah's in a rusted white van packed with portable gear. He stepped out, squinting at the building like it was a crime lab he never expected to return to. Jesus, he muttered as Rachel led him down the East Hall. They built over it? Looks like it. Tom ran a handheld scanner over the wall and nodded. Hollow space behind here, roughly 5 by 8 feet, no insulation, just a pocket, and here. He tapped a corner. This wasn't taped correctly. Sloppy work. Someone rushed this. Rachel exhaled. Can you open it without causing a scene? Tom gave a thin smile. You brought me in, didn't you? 2 hours later, after rerouting staff and using Shadow as a distraction with the kids in the courtyard, Tom carefully removed the drywall panel, cutting through the makeshift screws and weakened tape. The wall creaked open like a door to a long-forgotten secret. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog. Rachel stepped forward, flashlight sweeping the space. It wasn't a room, it was a crawl chamber, just high enough for a child to sit upright. Mold in the corners, a rat nest in the far end, and in the middle, a torn-up mattress, a rusted bucket, and a pile of crumpled drawings. Rachel's breath hitched. She knelt and picked one up carefully, a stick figure crying, surrounded by walls. Above it, the name, Jesse, scribbled in red crayon. He was here, Rachel whispered. Tom crouched beside her, scanning the floor with a UV flashlight. There's evidence of human presence. Hair, blood traces, dried saliva. This was occupied for days, maybe longer. Rachel stood, fists clenched. Tell me you can date it, she said. Tom nodded. I'll take samples, but it won't matter. Unless someone listens. Rachel looked back at the drawings. They will. That night, Rachel filed a formal report, not just with the Sheriff's Department, but with the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, Child Protective Services, and the Attorney General's office. She included every name, every statement, every photo and time-stamped video she had taken of the room, Shadow's alert records, the testimony from Lucille, Caleb, even Ben's drawing. She knew the moment she hit send that the orphanage would come for her, legally, politically, personally. But it didn't matter anymore. The wall was open now, and so was the truth. The fallout came quickly. Within 48 hours, the board of St. Elijah's issued a public statement denying all allegations. They labeled Rachel a disgruntled officer acting outside of protocol. The local news outlets ran mixed coverage, some sympathetic, others skeptical. One conservative outlet claimed she was manufacturing drama to push an anti-institutional agenda. Rachel didn't watch the news. She watched the kids. She went back to the orphanage, not in uniform but as herself, and sat with them. Elaine stood by her side. Shadow lay by the playground like a sentry. Slowly, one by one, the children started to speak. A girl with missing front teeth said she hated the quiet room because it was cold like a refrigerator. A boy no older than 6 whispered that Mr. Whitmore told him, "Dogs can't talk, but they know lies." Another child said Jesse used to sing songs at night softly, until one day, he didn't anymore. Rachel recorded everything. And then, on the 4th day, she received the call that changed everything. "Rachel Langley," the voice said. "Yes? This is ADA Lorraine Parker with the Attorney General's office. We've reviewed your materials. I need you to bring your witnesses to Harrisburg, and I want that dog with you." Rachel's voice cracked. "You believe me?" Parker paused. "I believe the wall, the evidence, the kids, and yes, I believe the dog." 1 week later, the Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into St. Elijah's Orphanage. Harold Whitmore was placed on administrative leave, but the case wouldn't be easy. The board had lawyers, big ones. They claimed the wall was part of emergency asbestos containment, that records were incomplete due to renovations, that no complaints were filed directly with the administration. Rachel knew what they were doing. Delay, deflect, discredit. So she found a new strategy, one the public couldn't ignore. She called a local reporter, one who didn't owe favors to the board, a woman named Naomi Carr, whose sister had once aged out of foster care with no support. Naomi listened. She asked hard questions. Then she visited the site. She knelt beside the wall. She watched Shadow sniff the crawl space and whimper. She saw the drawings, and she wrote a headline that hit harder than any court document. What the dog remembered: the orphanage, the wall, and the secret they tried to bury. The story went viral overnight. Parents started calling. Former residents came forward. Donors pulled funding. One state senator launched an emergency oversight hearing. The tide was turning. And then came the knock. Rachel opened her apartment door to find a man in a ball cap and weathered jeans. He looked unsure of himself, like he wasn't used to being anywhere but alone. "I heard you've been looking for Jesse Dalton," he said. Rachel's heart nearly stopped. "You knew him?" "I was in the room next to his. Back then, at St. Elijah's." He looked down. I think I was the last person to hear him scream." Rachel took a deep breath. "Will you tell his story?" The man's eyes glistened. "I think it's time someone did." There's a kind of silence that fills a courtroom just before a child speaks. It's not the usual silence of reverence or order. It's heavier, like everyone is collectively holding their breath, waiting to see whether a voice once silenced will finally be heard. That was the silence when Ben took the stand. Rachel Langley sat in the front row, dressed in civilian clothes, not her uniform. She didn't want this moment to feel like another report, another file. She wanted it to feel like what it was: truth finally rising to the surface. Shadow lay quietly at her feet. He hadn't barked in days, not since Harold Whitmore had been formally charged with child endangerment, unlawful confinement, and obstruction of justice. But Rachel could feel the dog's muscles twitch with anticipation, like he understood what this moment meant. Ben looked small behind the court's wooden rail, his legs swinging slightly above the floor. His shoes didn't quite touch the footrest, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. "He told me I had to be good," Ben said, eyes fixed on the ADA across from him. "And if I wasn't good, I'd go in the dark again." ADA Lorraine Parker nodded gently. "Can you tell us what the dark is, Ben?" Ben swallowed. "It's the quiet room. But it's not quiet. It's scary. There's bugs. And I heard someone cry in there before. I think it was Jesse." A murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge called for silence, but the emotion hung thick in the air. "And what happened during the ceremony, Ben?" Parker continued. "When Shadow barked at Mr. Whitmore?" Ben glanced toward the gallery where Rachel gave him the softest nod of encouragement. "I think Shadow knew," he said. He knew something was wrong. That one line, Shadow knew, would become the phrase that defined the trial. Naomi Carr, the journalist who broke the case, made it her lead in every follow-up article. Shadow knew when the adults didn't. Shadow knew when the board denied. Shadow knew when the children were too afraid to speak. It wasn't just a dog story anymore. It was a reckoning. In the days that followed, testimony poured in. Lucille, now 17, told her story with quiet strength. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her words cut sharper than tears ever could. Caleb took the stand next. His voice cracked halfway through, but he finished anyway, recounting the time Whitmore dragged him down the hallway by his collar like a disobedient dog. And then came the man who knocked on Rachel's door, the one who said he'd been in the room next to Jesse's. His name was Noah Bledsoe, now 31, a welder with a wife and 2 kids. He hadn't spoken about St. Elijah's in over 2 decades, but when he sat on that witness stand, something broke open. I remember the night Jesse disappeared, he said. We shared a wall. I heard him crying, then screaming, then nothing. The next morning, the staff told me he'd been moved to a better home, but there were no bags, no paperwork, just silence. He looked directly at the jury. And the worst part? I believed them, because I was too scared not to. Meanwhile, Shadow had become something of a local hero. Children drew him in sidewalk chalk outside the courthouse. Strangers dropped off bags of treats at the sheriff's office with notes like, "For the goodest boy." And on more than one occasion when Rachel walked him down Main Street, people stopped to pet him and say thank you. But for Rachel, it wasn't about fame. It was about Jesse. Because even with the testimonies, even with the evidence, there was still one haunting truth. They hadn't confirmed where was he. The answer came from the most unexpected place. A retired contractor named Henry Lovett. He'd read Naomi's latest article and called her directly. Said he had something she needed to hear. Within hours, Rachel and Ada Parker were sitting across from him in his living room, surrounded by old taxidermy and decades of dust. I was hired by St. Elijah's about 6 years ago, Lovett began. They said they needed a quiet containment wall built, something to shut off part of the east wing due to mold. I asked why they didn't just clear the space. They said it had sentimental value, that it needed to be preserved. Rachel leaned forward. Did you see anything inside the space before you closed it? Lovett hesitated. A mattress, some papers, a name carved into the concrete. Jesse. He rubbed his hands together. I didn't think much of it. Until I read that article. Until I saw the dog. Parker's voice was sharp. Did they ask you to seal it in a way that couldn't be reopened? Lovett nodded. They paid extra for insulation, drywall, sealant. Told me it had to look like it was never there. Rachel stood. Would you be willing to testify? Lovett looked down. I think I have to. With Lovett's testimony, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The prosecution moved swiftly. Whitmore's defense team, realizing they were cornered, attempted a plea deal, but Ada Parker refused. She wanted a jury to hear it. She wanted every piece of evidence spoken out loud, in front of people who had once ignored those cries in the dark. During the closing arguments, Parker's voice didn't rise. She didn't need theatrics. She had the truth. For decades, St. Elijah's was praised for order and discipline, but behind its brick walls, children were taught fear, taught that love was conditional, silence was survival, and pain was part of growth. But it took a dog, just a dog, to say, no, not anymore. She paused, looking at the jury. Shadow barked because he recognized what we refused to see. Trauma, abuse, horror. And if a dog can act on that instinct, why didn't we? It took the jury less than 3 hours to reach a verdict, guilty on all counts. Rachel sat still as the words were read, her heart heavy not with celebration, but relief. Justice didn't undo the past, it didn't unmake the scars, but it meant someone had finally listened. As Whitmore was led away in cuffs, Rachel looked at Shadow. He didn't bark. He just watched. Quiet. Resolute. Knowing. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Rachel gave only one statement. This wasn't about me. This was about a boy who disappeared, about children who were told to keep quiet, and about a dog who refused to let them be forgotten. She paused, hand on Shadow's head. If you're listening to this, remember, some heroes don't wear badges, some walk on 4 legs. It had been 3 months since the verdict. The once proud gates of St. Elijah's Orphanage now stood locked and rusted, yellow tape still fluttering in the wind. The children had been relocated to smaller, better-vetted homes across the county. The board had been dissolved, its members under investigation for covering up years of abuse, and Harold Whitmore now sat behind bars awaiting sentencing. But Rachel Langley knew that real healing wasn't measured in arrests or court decisions. It was measured in the quiet things, like the way Ben finally slept through the night without nightmares. Or how Lucille applied for college after years of believing she wasn't worth a future. Or the day Caleb volunteered to speak to kids entering foster care, kids just like he once was. And in the middle of it all was Shadow, the dog who started it. Rachel watched him now, sprawled out across her small backyard, chewing on a tennis ball like he hadn't just helped uncover one of the most horrifying secrets in Pennsylvania's child welfare history. To the world, Shadow was a hero. To Rachel, he was still just her partner, her steady, silent force of instinct and protection, her friend. The media buzz had faded, but the impact lingered. Donations poured into child advocacy centers. Volunteers signed up in record numbers. Even the governor's office proposed new legislation named after Jesse Dalton, the Quiet Room Ban Act, a bill designed to outlaw the use of isolation spaces in all residential facilities for minors. And Jesse? His name was never found on an adoption form, no school records, no employment history. Jesse Dalton had vanished sometime between 2009 and 2011. Officially, he was listed as missing under suspicious circumstances. Unofficially, Rachel knew, so did Shadow. They had opened the wall. They had seen the drawings, the mattress, the signs of life lived in isolation, and then erased. A memorial now stood on the orphanage grounds, just outside the crumbling East Wing. A small plaque read, "In memory of those who were silenced. You are heard now. You are not forgotten." Beneath it, a statue of a German shepherd stood proud, eyes facing forward, tail relaxed. At its paws lay sculpted crayon drawings, forever preserved, in stone. Rachel had fought against that statue at first, thought it was too much. But when Ben visited the site and placed a real drawing at the base, she knew it mattered. Shadow didn't bark when they visited. He simply stood, still, watching, like he always did. On a quiet Sunday morning, Rachel sat in a coffee shop near the courthouse sipping black coffee, a file folder open beside her. Shadow sat under the table, half asleep but alert when the bell over the front door jingled. Lucille walked in, wearing jeans and a Temple University sweatshirt. Her hair was longer now, pulled back into a messy ponytail. She looked older, not just in years but in weight carried. Rachel smiled. "You made it." "I had to," Lucille said, sliding into the booth. "I wanted to see you before I left." Rachel tilted her head. "Leaving?" Lucille smiled. "I got a scholarship. Social work program. I'm moving to Philly next week." Rachel's throat caught. "You're going to be incredible at it." Lucille nodded slowly. "I hope so. I want to be the adult I wish I'd had." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of understanding. Then, Lucille pulled something from her bag, a small laminated photo. It was one of the drawings Rachel had taken from the crawl space, the one with the stick figure, the crying child, and the name Jesse scribbled in red. "I had it cleaned up," Lucille said. "For me. For him. I still dream about that night sometimes, about the crying through the wall." Rachel reached across the table and gently placed her hand on Lucille's. "You didn't imagine it. You didn't make it up. You were brave enough to remember." Lucille exhaled. "I think I'm finally ready to forgive myself." Rachel squeezed her hand. "Then you already did the hardest part." Later that week, Rachel found herself back at the sheriff's office, desk stacked with reports, voicemails blinking red, and a new batch of recruits sitting through orientation. She didn't speak often at trainings anymore, but this time she'd been asked specifically, so she stood before them. New officers, in crisp uniforms, eager eyes, steady pens, and she said, "There will be days when the job feels like forms and red tape. Days when the system feels too big to move. But listen to me, never underestimate your gut. And never underestimate the quiet. The quiet is where secrets live. But it's also where truth begins." She paused, then smiled at the back corner, where Shadow sat beside his water bowl. Sometimes the best officer in the room doesn't say a word. He just listens. The recruits chuckled, but Rachel knew they got it. Or at least, they would. That evening, she drove home with the windows down. The radio played some 90s alt-rock tune she hadn't heard in years. Shadow leaned into the wind, ears flapping, tongue out, eyes wide like a pup again. They pulled up to a familiar stoplight, where a mural had been painted on the side of an old abandoned building. It was new. Rachel hadn't seen it finished. It showed a child silhouette holding hands with a dog. Above them, the words, "Every voice deserves to be heard, even the silent ones." Rachel sat back in her seat, blinking hard. She didn't take a photo, didn't post it online. She just looked, and let it sit in her chest like a full breath she hadn't known she needed. In the end, the case wasn't about heroics. It wasn't about the courtroom drama or headlines or even the dog who barked. It was about children, about listening, about refusing to let fear win. It was about choosing in the smallest ways to stand between someone vulnerable and someone who meant them harm, just like Shadow did, just like Rachel learned to do, just like Ben and Lucille and Caleb now do for others. Thank you so much for following this story all the way to the end. It's not always easy to sit with pain, especially the kind that hides in institutions, behind locked doors, and beneath polished smiles. But if you stayed with us, if you listened, then you're part of the reason silence doesn't win. Now we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever seen something that didn't feel right but didn't know what to do? What would you have done if you were in Rachel's shoes or Shadow's paws? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the power of instincts, the importance of paying attention, and what it means to stand up even when you're standing alone. And remember, some heroes don't speak. They just bark.